back, relax, and maybe get yourself a snack. Me and you gonna have a little chat about books. Hey guys! So I'm here today to talk about 3 books that I recently listened to on audio, so I thought I would put them all in a review together, although they are quite different, but oh well. So the first one I have to talk about is The Silk Roads, which is a historical non-fiction. The next one I have to talk about is Forging Divinity, which is the debut, and then the final one I have to talk about is It Takes a Thief to Catch a Sunrise, which is by Rob J. Hayes. So I'm going to start off by talking about The Silk Roads. And The Silk Roads is a book that I wanted to listen to for quite a while, or I wanted to read it. I didn't necessarily want to listen, but then it came up on Audible as a deal, so I bought it and I thought, why not? I'll give it a go. And I'm really happy I did, because I found a lot of information that I didn't know about the East and the history of the East from this book. I have a really strong interest in history, which I think is why fantasy works for me, because it's kind of based off of history and historical time periods, and I really like old ancient history, not like modern history. I'm not very into guns and shooting and that sort of thing, not at all. But I do love sort of the old times of jewels and silks and trading and not having money and currency and just trading between like groups of people and things like that. I thought that was all great, and I got a lot of that in the beginning stages of this book. It's set out chronologically and it goes through history from way back all the way through to sort of modern times up to and past the most recent wars, and I think that I definitely liked the first half of this book more than the second. The audiobook narrator was good, I enjoyed him, but I didn't feel like it was completely compelling. But it's not something that you can get really compelling about because it is just history. I think the author does a good job of trying to make it a bit more interesting and adding his own comments and thoughts as sort of sidelines, and that does make you more interested, but it's not quite the same as reading a great fantasy story, which is why I still love fantasy more than history. But with that being said, I think the first half of the book was really strong. I definitely enjoyed learning a lot of the things that I did. I didn't know most of the things about how the empires were formed and how many empires actually originated from Eastern countries that we have kind of just had erased from our history. We don't really get told much about the East, and we definitely don't get told about the victories that the East had over the West. So I found a lot of that fascinating, and a lot of it was completely new knowledge to me. I'm sure if I'd googled it I could have found it, but still I didn't know it was a thing at all, and it's opened my eyes to a lot of topics that I would maybe now like to go and read in more detail about. So first half was a tick. Second half, where it started going into modern history, no, I didn't like that. I'm not a big fan of modern history of any kind, west, east, whatever, doesn't matter. Don't really find it interesting. Just people shooting each other does not really have an awful lot of appeal to me. And a lot of it was political. There were some interesting things about, for example, how the West has taken over different parts of the East to gather oil from, but even with these interesting tidbits, I think the majority of it was a bit stale for me, so I didn't love the second half as much, and therefore I ended up only giving it a 3 stars. I do think if you're interested in history of the eastern side of the world, then this is a fascinating read, and it definitely read well as an audiobook, but for me personally, I don't think it's one that I would thoroughly recommend as a historical text. It's not like my favourite thing ever. Maybe that's just because it went too close to modern day, I don't know. Anyway, I gave that 3 stars. The second book I want to talk about is called Forging Divinity, and this is the first one I believe in a duology or a trilogy maybe. There are 2 books out in it at the moment, and this follows the story of 3 different characters. We have Lydia, Jonan and Talion, and they are set in a world where you have different types of magic. So you have core magic and then you have dominion magic, and each of these characters has a kind of magic of their own. So Lydia, for example, is a court sorceress, and she's very powerful. A lot of people look up to her, and she is someone that can divine spells and kind of create them and make them do things. So a lot of people use her spells and think she's great. She's very powerful. However, she doesn't always agree with the kingdom she works for, and so at the beginning of the book we follow her as she breaks out a prisoner from the jail there, and that happens to be Talion. And Talion is quite an interesting character. He doesn't really know too much about why he is being imprisoned at the moment, but he does know it's to do with the magical sword that he carries at his hip. And this sword is actually the reason he came to the city where it's all based from the start. He doesn't know too much of its history, but he knows it's destined for him, and he wants to go and find out about its nature and where it came from an old acquaintance of his family's. But when he gets to this city, he cannot find this person and he instantly gets arrested. So that's where we pick up his story. And then we also have Jonan, and Jonan is a spy for a foreign kingdom. He has his own agenda for being in the city, and he kind of gets mixed up with Lydia and Talion quite early on too. And we follow them as they all end up working together in their own ways to uncover a plot about people going missing and corrupt leadership. Now, I liked this story in that I thought it was a interesting, fun fantasy read, but I didn't think it was a fully developed one. And I think because this is a debut, you can really tell that it is. It feels like there are some clunky sections, there are some slow sections, there's a lot of areas of text that are just kind of repeated later on, so you get told one thing and then a couple chapters later, in case you forgot, you get told it again. And I feel like it doesn't let the reader kind of have their own understanding and their own decisions and knowledge. I feel like it dumbs it down a little bit, so it didn't feel like a fully fleshed out, really great fantasy read. The magic is interesting, the plot's quite fast paced and I enjoyed it, but it wasn't a book that made me instantly reach for book number 2 in the series. And that's a shame because actually this author is one of my favourites and this is the first book he ever wrote, so obviously it's not going to be as good as his newer stuff necessarily, but I loved Sufficiently Advanced Magic by this author, and I would say if you're gonna choose between this one and Sufficiently Advanced Magic, Sufficiently Advanced Magic is the one to go for because that's definitely leagues better. You can, however, see how the author originated from this book, and I think it has a lot of the roots of his style there, so I think that was really good, and I probably will read the second one at some point. I audiobooked this, so I found it a good read on audio too, and yeah, I just generally enjoyed it but didn't think it was great. So again, I gave this one a 3 out of 5 stars. The last one I have to talk about is It Takes a Thief to Catch a Sunrise, and this one is a pretty fun one that I listened to on audio. I picked this one up because I've already read a couple of books by this author. I've read Where Loyalties Lie and The Fifth Empire of Man, and I really enjoyed both of those. They're pirate stories. But this one is not a pirate story. It's actually set in Regency Europe, and we follow 2 con thieves. They are in love with one another, but together they pull off some of the craziest heists and cons and trickery that this world has ever seen. They are quite notorious, they are known to be the best at their jobs, and we follow them at the very start as they are pulling off a heist and trying to get their fortune, which will mean they never have to do a job again. This goes quite well, they end up with the money, but then they have a mysterious man come and visit them and tell them he has decided they're going to work for him. They don't get a choice. Our 2 main characters are Jacques Rouveau and Isabelle de Rosier. They work well together, they've been working together for many, many years. They're a couple, they are in love, they are pretty fun to read about, and they're both very skilled at acting and playing the part and being able to con and deceive people, which is why they do their job so very well. What I think I liked the most about this is that it instantly felt readable. This is one of those stories where you start it and you just know it's going to be a fun read, it's going to be a lot of enjoyable moments, and it's going to make you laugh and smile, and that is exactly what I had whilst reading this book. It was light-hearted, it was enjoyable, there were some moments where I did find myself surprised and intrigued, but it's not something that's revolutionary, it's just a really well-written, enjoyable read, and I like that a lot. Not only that, but also the narrator did an excellent job of bringing the characters to life and making them feel very real and fleshed out, and I always think a good narrator can really bump up a book that is subpar. Not that this was very good anyway, but because the narrator was good, I really enjoyed it, and I just found that I devoured the whole audiobook in about a day because I just really enjoyed it. It's quite short, and it's very short, sweet, and yeah, I liked it. The plot of this one actually kind of almost reminded me in style and the way it plays out of a sword and sorcery, kind of in the same vein as like Michael J. Sullivan. So if you like those kind of books, I think you'll definitely enjoy this one too. There's quite a few different jobs that we follow our main characters on as they are working and hopefully earning money and stealing money and learning secrets and uncovering things. And I feel like you get drawn into their action and adventure quite quickly. Overall, I really enjoyed it and I think it's a lot of fun, very light-hearted and easy, but definitely one that is worth giving a go to. So I would thoroughly recommend it, and I ended up giving it a 4 out of 5 stars. I did go to instantly buy the next one on audio and find that it wasn't there. It is out on Kindle, I believe, so I'll be picking it up there, but sadly it doesn't seem to have an audiobook at the moment, which makes me very sad because I really liked the first one, but I would thoroughly recommend it all the same. So those are my reviews of the 3 audiobooks I recently listened to. I'd love to have your thoughts if you've read any of these, or if you have other recommendations on audio for me, then do leave them in the comments as well. Thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you very soon in my next video. Bye guys!
Thank you for watching my video today. Go pick up a book, then come back and chat with me again.